In December of 2018, we did receive credible FBI information regarding an attack plot with no specific time, date, or location fixed to it, but it was an FBI-led investigation from that point.
Two homes raided in Kingston, Ontario, 2 arrests and now 1 charge for a terror-related offence. The accused is a minor who was allegedly connected to a bomb plot. The other person arrested has now been released. The CBC's David Cochran is in Kingston with the latest. Hey, David, thanks for being with us. Bring us up to speed. What is the latest on this?
Well, there's a lot of things. We got a lot of information from the RCMP today in their briefing, essentially what has been a series of arrests in connection with a national security counterterrorism operation. 2 people were arrested. 1 of them was charged, 1 of them was not, and the second person who was not charged, we can tell you now, has been released from custody. So let me just walk you through this. There is a minor who we cannot identify who has been arrested and has been charged with terrorism offenses for essentially trying to organize a bomb plot, build a bomb, and then have that bomb detonated in a public place by convincing someone else to deliver the bomb to an undisclosed location, an unspecific target, but in a way that would inflict serious bodily injury and maybe even kill some people. That person is still in custody. A second person, a friend of this minor, was arrested, a 20-year-old man named Hussam Eddin Al-Zahabi. His father confirmed for us this morning that he had been arrested and taken into custody as part of the raid on the 2 locations that the RCMP and the National Security Forces hit during their operations yesterday. Well, we've confirmed from the father that, in fact, his son has now been released without being charged. So Hussam Eddin Al-Zahabi, the 20-year-old student, the Syrian refugee, has been in Canada for 2 years, lived in Kuwait for 10 years prior to that before being sponsored by a church group to be brought in here. He has been released. That is not what the police told us earlier today, because he was arrested. They had a 24-hour window where they had to decide whether there's going to be a charge, which would allow them to keep him in custody for a greater period of time and then move into the court process. It never got to that stage. This does not mean he couldn't be rearrested as the investigation continues. But our information right now is that the 20-year-old is out. He has not been charged. The minor is still in custody. He has been charged with 2 serious offenses, trying to build a bomb and then trying to blow it up in a public place.
And that investigation, David, tell us a bit about what the police revealed around when it started, how it progressed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they got a tip in December, and it came from the FBI, and it was credible information that this minor, they allege, had capacity and intent to build a bomb and orchestrate a bomb plot. Now, the thing they kept stressing at this briefing, Vashi, is that there was no specific target, there was no plan to do it, but there was an intent and an attempt to pull together the means to build a bomb. And in fact, they say that during their investigation, they found trace elements of explosives in the places that they searched. They wouldn't tell us at which locations. And in fact, they found some materials that they had to take out and do a controlled detonation because they were worried about the danger of those materials. But it's all started with a tip from the FBI, Vashi, which is a little bit like the Aaron Driver case in Ontario a while back, where the FBI gave a tip there, and that also led to an operation that thwarted the execution of a larger bomb plot. There were 7 agencies involved with this: the FBI, the RCMP, the OPP, Kingston Police, Canada Border Service Agency, CSIS, and even FinTrack, which monitors financial transactions, and about 300 people, and a surveillance plane, Vashi, that was circling around Kingston for weeks. It was so noisy, it was driving the locals nuts and drawing a lot of attention to its activities, as they complained about it on social media. It even got some news attention as people tried to figure out what the mystery plane was. But it just sort of shows you the scale and the scope of the operation that was launched based on this tip from the FBI around Christmas.
And what about, I know these charges, in the case of the minor, are terrorism-related, but what about the motivation of the 2 that they initially arrested? I know you're saying one's being released, but I'm wondering, I didn't find that the RCMP said a whole lot about that. What are your impressions?
Yeah, they were not very forthcoming, and that was by design. I mean, they have witnesses they need to talk to, they have other intelligence they need to assess, and then evidence they need to gather, and they don't want to pollute the witness pool or the information pool by releasing too much. So, you know, it's not in our interest as journalists that they're so reticent to say things, but if for case integrity, that's what's important for them. And I can tell you, I'm outside the court here in Kingston. There was a court appearance here this afternoon from the minor who has been arrested and charged with these court offenses. We learned a lot in that court appearance. We can't tell you anything. There is a sweeping publication ban on this. We can tell you it lasted for about a half an hour. His family was there. The family of the 20-year-old man who's been released were also there. The details of what was discussed we can't talk about. It's all covered by this publication ban, but there's going to be another court appearance for this young man on Monday here in Kingston. Vashi.
All right, thank you so much, David. That's the CBC's David Cochran for us in Kingston. The federal government says the official threat level for Canada remains at medium, where it's been since 2014. Both the Prime Minister and Public Safety Minister weighed in on today's arrests and charges earlier this afternoon.
We are a country that is one of the safest in the world. Wherever you are in this country, in your homes, in your towns, in your communities, we are safe.
Canadians can be confident that whenever credible information is obtained about a potential threat, that the appropriate police and security agencies take the necessary steps to ensure the security of the country and the safety of all of its citizens.
So why are police releasing so few details about this alleged attack plot? Based on what we do know, can any conclusions be drawn? Jessica Davis is a former strategic analyst with CSIS. She's now president of Insight Threat Intelligence. And Pierre-Yves Bourdois is a former deputy commissioner of the RCMP. He's now president of PY Public Safety Management. Both are here with me in studio. Hi there. Thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate it. Mr. Bourdois, I'm going to start with you on that news that David was telling us about, that there are 2 people arrested. One is a minor, and that minor has been charged with terrorism-related offenses. The 20-year-old individual who was arrested has been released without charges. What's your interpretation of that?
Well, a number of possible scenarios here, in the sense that they've gathered, obviously, the RCMP with their search have gathered a lot of information. They have to go through all of this information in order to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in front of the court that these individuals, especially the one that has been released, might have been accused of a crime, accessories to the intentions of the minor in this particular case.
Is it harder to charge? I mean, what is the challenge? I just think it would strike the public as odd that these 2 people who are suspected of being attached to a terrorism plot, one will now be walking free tonight.
Correct. But what you have to bear in mind, and what was interesting at the press conference, is that the FBI linked this particular case to the RCMP. The RCMP during the press conference indicated that over 300 people were working, and you've indicated a number of federal agencies involved. So it's obviously a very complex case, and hence the reason why they probably need additional time in order to gather sufficient evidence to bring people before justice.
Ms. Davis, do you anticipate that it wouldn't be a lot of time before charges are laid?
Well, in terms of the amount of time, we see oftentimes a significant lag in terms of the charges that are laid. What I would be surprised about is if there aren't additional charges laid against other people. Maybe not this individual, maybe other people, because what we know about terrorism in Canada is that individuals rarely act alone. They generally have people who they're getting material or financial support from or encouragement. So having additional individuals involved in this investigation wouldn't surprise me at all.
But what about this individual? Why do you think that maybe they won't be charged eventually? I mean, I just take it from the point of view, I know you guys are the experts, but I take it from the point of view of people sitting around the dinner table tonight going, this person was arrested with somebody who has been charged. The police described them as, drawing up an attack, basically, and it was prevented. They didn't know exactly where or anything like that. They hadn't identified that. But, I mean, that is something that would be concerning, I think, to a lot of Canadians. So I'm just wondering, how they would be wondering why.
Yeah, it's really tough for us to get inside the minds of the investigators and laying the charges, but I think we can also agree that the RCMP has been very, I would say, risk-averse in laying charges over the last few months. We saw with the Abu Huzaifa case, no charges laid against the individual who returned from Syria. They are looking for the ability to get a conviction. So if they're not at that level with whatever evidence that they have, I think that's probably weighing in terms of their ability to lay those, or willingness to lay those charges.
And Mr. Bourdois, the evidentiary bar for terrorism-related charges is very high. Is that correct?
That is indeed correct. You have to bear in mind that investigators have their threshold is to have a reasonable expectation of conviction. And in this particular case, you look at FinTrack, and FinTrack was involved, which means that there were financial transactions involved. You look at Canada Border Services Agency involved as well, you know, which means there might have been other, as my learned partners indicated, that there might have been other people south of the border or anywhere in the world involved. Because what actually surprised me is the fact that there were also explosives seized as a result of this particular
neutralized, they said.
Neutralized. So,
can you explain in layman's terms what that means? I mean, essentially, was it detonated safely?
You know, and the types of explosive that would potentially generate larger type of damages in the public area. So as far as I'm concerned, it appeared quite obvious that this investigation advanced rather quickly. What you have to bear in mind also is the investigators, they have to strike the right balance between gathering evidence and also the safety and security of Canadians. And what's interesting in this particular case is the fact that they've mentioned an airplane flying overhead that actually drawn the attention of the general public. Well, you look at the Aaron Drivers case in August of 2016, when the individual was actually sitting in a taxi ready to head out with explosive on this person that needed to be neutralized. So the RCMP has learned over the years lessons in relation to national security investigations, and they just didn't want to take any chances at this particular juncture.
As far as the investigation goes, Ms. Davis, that plane is, you know, how rare is it to use a plane like that for surveillance? And the police insist that it had nothing to do with the timing, and very forcefully insist that, you know, they were just waiting for the evidentiary bar to be met before they could arrest someone. But there has been some speculation that you know, could it have influenced the police's desire to arrest these people because citizens in Kingston were noticing?
Yeah, so I definitely don't know how often the planes are used in surveillance. It's one of the first times I've ever become aware of it, and I've looked at, you know, dozens, if not hundreds, of terrorism cases or terrorism investigations in Canada. The impact that plane had on the plot itself, I think, while it may not have impacted the RCMP's decision to proceed with the arrests at that time, I have to assess and assume that it impacted the behavior of the individuals involved. It was widely reported on media, social media, and in the Kingston Whig Standard that plane was an RCMP surveillance plane. Now, anybody who's involved in a terrorism investigation, the individuals who are plotting, they tend towards the paranoid. They see surveillance when there is none. They tend to see surveillance around every corner. So if there's an RCMP plane that's been identified as a surveillance plane flying above them in Kingston, they're going to assume that that's what they're there for, and they will change their behavior around that. They may cut off communications, they may try to destroy evidence, they may do a number of different things, and that would impact the course of an investigation and whether or not convictions are able to be obtained.
Let me ask you both about some of the political implications of this story, because there, at least in the case of the gentleman who was arrested, the 20-year-old and released, we know that he was a Syrian refugee who had lived in Kuwait for 10 years. The Conservatives commended the RCMP for the job done, but then highlighted what they said was a need for better screening at the border. Mr. Bourgeois, what's your comment on that?
Well, the current screening process at the border, if you look at the number of people that came into our country over the last, in the recent past, the screening is quite elaborate at the border, and it involves the RCMP, CSIS, the Canada Border Services Agency, and also you know, international agencies as well. So, of course, there's, you know, if you look at the number of people involved and the fact that this particular individual came into our country, it stands to reason that this individual was, you know, an individual that was brought thanks to a sponsorship by the local church, I understand. And, you know, it all depends what transpired once the individual is in the country. And in this particular case was in the country for over a 2-year period. So acquaintances and meeting with other individuals might have sent this person down the wrong path.
Both the public safety minister and the RCMP were asked about motive in this case, and along the same lines. You know, is this a lone wolf? Are they inspired by a larger terror group? Are they attached to a larger terror plot or cause? And there were no answers given at all. that hasn't always been the case in cases like this. Many times I remember the case in Edmonton, right away they said there was an ISIS flag there. They still haven't even pressed terrorism charges in that case, but they said there was an ISIS flag there. What were your impressions of that and the sort of lack of answers around motive, and does it surprise you at all?
I found it surprising, and I thought it was quite unusual, because in order to lay the terrorism charges, they would have had to have some sort of clear ideological link there. So they would have had to, the individual would have had to been motivated by political, religious, ideological considerations. So they know what that is. What I would suspect is that they're not saying anything because of the ongoing investigation. So whatever the motive is could tip off other individuals who are potentially still under investigation in that area.
And does that, Mr. Bourgeois, do you agree that likely there are other individuals?
Well, if you look at the mere fact that the FBI actually is the one who red flagged these individuals, it sends a clear message, in my opinion, that they were actually using contacts internationally through the internet, where the FBI and other federal agencies are actually patrolling.
Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you very much to both of you for your time and insight. Thanks to Jessica Davis and Pierre-Yves Bourgeois.